Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on the Pathfinder role-playing game system. Where we last left off, we were talking about adventuring and talking about the various environments you're going to explore when you're traveling out in the world. Today, I'm going to introduce you to aquatic environments. Let's talk about the basis of it. Now, aquatic environments is actually the most dangerous and hazardous environment to your health. You're not made to be in this environment. And it's also one of the least uniform. It's the most uniform. It has the least amount of features. A lot of times just open waters. Now the sea floor, it can have actual features and be a lot different, but then you're at the bottom of the ocean rather than traveling at the top of it. Now it comes in two forms. Non-moving water and moving water. Moving water varies in its distance and speed. If you're talking about a slow-moving river, it could move a few miles per hour. That's not very fast at all. But then you can get into waters which are much more swift. It could be from 10 to 40 feet per round, or it could be even up to rapids, in which it would be 60 to 90 feet per round that the water would be moving at. If the water's only rough, it's going to be a DC 15 swim check. But if it's like rapids or stormy conditions, it's DC 20. Now, the end of your turn is when you're going to move the distance that you're being pushed by the water. Effectively, whatever the speed of the water, you're moving down at that end of your turn. This means that you can attempt swim checks to fight against it to try to keep your place, but depending on the speed of the water, you might not be able to keep up with it. Characters that get swept away by the water, basically you lose control and are being swept away, you have to first make a DC 20 swim check, effectively to stay afloat for the first point. If you exceed this check by 5 or more, you can actually grab onto something, whether it be a rock or a tree branch or something else that's in the water that you can stabilize yourself and get yourself caught as these rapids are kind of flowing by you. It will require, regardless if you're grabbing or not, 3 DC 20 swim checks to get to the side once you've been swept away into rapids. If you grabbed onto something, you're considered stopped and actually have to start up again with the checks. You're basically taking yourself out of this condition and have to again brave the water. You can actually rescue someone from this condition, especially if they grabbed onto something, but you treat it exactly like saving someone from quicksand. It's the exact same rules for it. Now, non-flowing water will traditionally need a DC 10 check in order to swim in it. Think of it this way, the levels of swimming are important to know about. 10 for calm, 15 for rough, 20 for storming. These levels, it might make a difference later on when we're talking about them. Now, unless you're able to somehow breathe or exist underwater, you're going to have trouble and you're going to have to risk drowning. The advantage of being underwater, you can move in any direction. That's the first one. Now, you can see underwater. If it's clear water, you can see about 48 times 10 feet. But if it's murky water, it's about 1d8 times 10 feet that you can see away from yourself. The thing is, you're gonna, like, the slower the water, the clearer it often is. The faster the water, oftentimes the clearer it can be. There's a difference that you can come up with depending on the movement of the water, depends on the clarity. You just think about it this way. When you're in slow-moving water, it will offer very little cover or concealment when you're in there, unless you're near the bottom. Now, invisibility works differently when it comes to creatures in water. You displace water. You actually show up a lot easier. In being in water and being invisible, you only have a 20% miss chance, the normal concealment rather than the total concealment you'd have on land. You have a disadvantage against it. Now, if you're swimming or you're in chest-deep water or you're walking along the bottom of the floor of whatever water body you're in, you can attack. The thing is, there's a chart in the book that tells you how your attacks are going to be affected by this, both the attack roll and the damage of it. Some basic things are you have to think, you can't throw anything underwater. It's impossible. You can make ranged attacks underwater, but regardless of the ranged penalty, you will also add, or I should say, subtract -2 for 5 feet of travel that your ranged attack goes. So not only do you get that initial penalty of whatever range you're trying to get to, it drops down very quickly when it's underwater. So you can see that ranged attacks really suck, and this is beyond how your melee attacks and everything else will be affected while you're underwater. Now, if you're swimming or floating in water, you have improved cover against anybody on land. That means you have +8 AC and +4 to your reflex saves. If the target person on land has freedom of movement, they can actually ignore this effect. Now, if you're underwater, you're considered to have total cover. Again, if a person has freedom of movement and they're on land, they can once again ignore this. But you have to consider that there's this interaction, that it's much harder to attack someone within the water. Now, spells are normally unaffected by water. There are some exceptions. If the spell has an attack roll, it's going to count exactly the same way as any attack rolls I just talked about. The person will have cover against you. And if it has a fire descriptor, that's where we should talk about casting spells with the fire descriptor underwater. Because normal fire, you can't do anything underwater. It's fire. Water puts it out. But magical fire, you might still be able to do it. If a spell has a fire descriptor, when you would cast it underwater, you have to make a caster level check of a DC equal to 20 plus the level of the spell you're casting. If you succeed at this, you create a spell. It's not going to be fire. It's going to be superheated steam that you pour out, replacing the fire effect, effectively. That's a lot of effects. Now, you do have to consider the surface of water is going to block line of effect for this. You have to consider that it will be blocking it. So your steam-based spell will hit the surface of the water and not continue at all. So even if you've made that check in order to cast that spell, it still might not go, it won't go above the surface still. That's going to block your spell from breaking through it. It's going to be a barrier effectively to your steam-based spells. Now, you can still cast spells underwater. Granted, you might not be able to breathe there, which puts you with a very big disadvantage, but doesn't mean you can't cast a spell while underwater. It's going to require you to make a concentration check, DC 15 plus spell level, in order to cast it underwater, effectively to use your verbal components while you're underwater. Now, this does not mean you might not have to make the caster level check in order to cast your fire-based spell still too, so it might require 2 spells. Now, if you breathe underwater, you don't have to worry about that. You can cast it just fine. No interference. Now, in wilderness areas, there's the times where bodies of water may flood. Floods occur. It could be river melts, a dam breaking, like some kind of other problem going on that will cause a flood to occur. Streams and rivers will surge to about 1d10 plus 10 feet taller, and will be about 1d4 times 50% of the size of the river larger, meaning it's going to increase by that much, wider and taller. It's going to just surge out. This can temporarily cover over fords. It can wash away rivers. It can cause all kinds of damage, and it can be something dangerous. Any kind of speed of water is increased by 50% while it's in flood conditions, so it's actually a lot harder to cross it too. So that's it for today. I talked to you about aquatic environments. I talked to you about the 2 types of aquatic environments, moving water and non-moving water, and how you'd kind of work around each of those. Moving water being more like I'm trying to cross a river or something, and non-moving water might be in the middle of the ocean, where it's kind of not a lot of waves or anything. Again, I talked about all the different conditions. I talked about attacking in and out of water. I talked about attacking someone in the water. And of course, I talked about spell casting when it dealt with water. That you need to make caster level checks in order to cast fire spells, or concentration checks to cast spells in general when you're underwater. And I briefly mentioned flooding, because it's something that will probably happen in the course of time periods when it comes to rivers. In the next episode, I'm going to start talking about urban environments and exploring and adventuring within them. So if any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.